It's a few months since I've last been to Arica, and there seems to have been a bit of tree felling up by the hill, so it'll be interesting to see what's happening. So it's amazing. Arica is actually the nearest railway station to my house by road. It's 40 miles away. It's also 40 miles away from Glasgow, so it's incredible really. I suppose it tells you something about the geography of Argyll, and just the amount of lochs, just the undulating nature of the land. Yeah, so we're in Argyll at the moment. By the time we're getting just before Crean-Lark, you're actually into Stirlingshire. Literally a few miles further north, you're back in Argyll and Bute, and then a few miles further north, it is actually into Perthshire. Luckily it's cleared up a bit and there's no midges about, not that I can feel anyway. I've certainly seen them a lot worse than this. Obviously the rain brings them out usually, or late in the evening. So it's clear the tourist season's really in full swing in the West Highlands, because I've just been down to the shore of Loch Lomond there at the picnic area, and it's mobbed. Arica is pretty much a classic West Highland Line station. Obviously operated in the early days, as I mentioned, by the North British Railway, but the station buildings are West Highland Railway origin, who they were essentially the company who took charge of the architecture of the route. Classic layout really, island platform, passing loop, line either side, Swiss chalet station buildings, built in 1894 by the West Highland Railway. Another interesting point about Arica actually is that the main station building is no longer here. There is a signal box and there's now a replica waiting room. Now what actually happened was the original station building was condemned around 1999 due to subsidence. And what happened was, in actual fact, a replica signal box was built where the original building was located, and in the style of the original West Highland Railway. So let's have a wander into the old signal box. Originally the signal box here was located further down the platform, like further towards the platform ramp. It was relocated a few yards actually. It's obviously now a big open waiting room, but of course there would be a full lever frame and all the tablet exchange equipment in 1988 saw all that come to an end when RETB signalling was introduced. It's quite pleasing to report the lever frame has actually been saved and is at a narrow gauge railway, the Bled Hills and Wanlock Head down in Dumfriesshire. So that's quite nice to report. Looking inside, you can get somewhat a view of what the signaller would have, which was supposed to entail the whole platform and yard entrance for the best possible view. Thankfully, the majority of the West Highland signal boxes have been saved. Also quite standard for the West Highland Line is how the passing loops are very short, and I estimate from what I've seen a maximum of one 6-car sprinter can fit in either side usually, and all trains now do need to stop here pretty much to exchange the single track tokens. It's also nice to see that there still is a goods yard here, and there still is at a lot of the stations, to be fair. Generally the sidings are still used by engineers' vehicles. Of course at Arica it was still used for timber traffic until fairly recent years, actual loading of timber from lorries onto rail, but now it of course has gone all onto lorry and sea traffic too. The goods yard itself would have still been used until around the time of beaching, or possibly just before that, because it was quite regular practice, like most rural lines in Britain, for pick-up goods trains to run and actually drop off local supplies to individual stations, which that's a long lost art. But it is nice to see that the goods yard's still there. The station has a lot of character. I've just taken the decidedly hellish A82 road up to the next station on the line, which is Ardlough. Just like Arica, Ardlough has also lost its station building due to subsidence. It still also has a goods yard, which is nice to see. A very nice setting. Passenger services these days are obviously in the hands of Class 156 Sprinters, which took over from local-hauled trains in 1988. So they've been going for some time, about 30 odd years now. Technically, Class 156s actually took over West Highland services in January 1989, part of British Rail's second generation of diesel multiple units. The trains were designed to improve reliability and cut costs, a move which would spell the end for locomotive-hauled trains using Mark I and Mark II coaches. Not just in the Highlands, but all over the British network, where BR's provincial sector was still using a variety of older diesel classes on medium to long distance services. While this was a success economically, it did have a significant impact on the tourist sector, where trains became shorter and busier, with less panoramic views to enjoy the scenery in rural lines. Nevertheless, BR pressed ahead with the changeover, and the new Sprinter units replaced Class 37s on all West Highland services running to Glasgow Queen Street. Oban would no longer be served by separate trains, and all northbound trains on the line would divide into separate portions at Crean-Larich, one for Oban and one for Fort William, then joining together on the way back. Sprinters would also take over other routes in Scotland, including the routes to Kyle-Lachalsh, Wick and Thurso, plus the Glasgow and South Western routes to Carlisle and Stranraer. The intercity sector was run quite differently, particularly overnight sleeper workings between Scotland and the south of England, which remain loco-hauled to this day. The West Highland sleeper has been a fixture on the line since the early days, when through carriages from London King's Cross were carried in early morning and evening trains, running laterally from Fort William to London Euston. From 1989 it became a standalone train, carrying not only passengers but vehicles too, as a combined sleeper and motor rail service. Into the 1990s now, and the railway was doing well, despite still being heavily subsidised by the government, along with the rest of Scotland's rural routes. Freight traffic was buoyant and passenger levels were high, to the extent of regular overcrowding in the summer, and it didn't take a genius to work out that 2, even 4-car Sprinter units were never going to be up to the job, compared to the loco-haul trains of 6 or 7 coaches that they replaced. It really didn't make much sense, and inevitably this led to the reintroduction of 37s and Mark II coaches during the tourist season only, hauling some services to Oban, Fort William and Mallaig from summer 1992 to 94. 1994 was also the centenary year of the West Highland Line, and 2 specials were operated that August in celebration, the first being steam-hauled, running exactly 100 years to the day of the railway's opening. A few days later, we see the diesel-hauled tour run by Intercity, climbing north onto Rannoch Moor. Passenger services on the West Highland lines passed over to the newly privatised ScotRail company during 1994, with the sleeper still running separately under the Intercity banner. But in 1995, the sleeper was threatened with total withdrawal. deemed to be unviable with the rail now competing against faster journey times offered by road and domestic flights to London. The withdrawal bid was unsuccessful, following a huge backlash led by the Highland Regional Council and Friends of the West Highland Lines. The sleeper would survive, albeit with a compromise, that it could no longer carry motor rail vans and trains would run in shorter formations in the future. There was still considerable daytime freight activity on the Glasgow-Fort William route following privatisation, and the late 1990s saw most operations taken over by EWS. Bulk alumina tankers from Blyth in Northumberland were one of the regular cargoes, along with finished paper transported from Corpach. However, the new Millennium saw a drastic turn of events, first when the owner of Corpach Mill, Arjo Wiggins, ceased its contract with EWS in favour of road transport. Around the same time, a decision was also made by Alcan to use lorries instead of rail for the carrying of its finished aluminium products out of its plant in Lochaber. This meant the loss of the 3 times a week goods operated by Freightliner to Coatbridge. As a result, from mid-2001, Fort William was now served by only 1 freight train a day instead of 3. These cutbacks on the line happened despite the introduction of Class 66s to the route, handling the alumina traffic to North Blyth and timber to Arrochar and Crean-Larich. The log trains were also rationalised, becoming a nighttime only operation, before these two were withdrawn in 2006. Some of the lost freight traffic would return over the next few years, but on short-term contracts only, and, for the most part, heavy goods vehicles now batter their way along the busy A82 road instead. The impact of dozens of extra lorries each day is bigger traffic queues and a worse environmental impact, adding to the ever-growing crowds of tourists year in year. The opening of a bypass has improved life around the once quiet Crean-Larich village, but much of the route to Fort William and Inverness remains a bottleneck. Passenger-wise, things were much brighter for the West Highland Line during the 2000s, after the Mallaig extension line became a filming location for the Harry Potter movie series. West Coast Railway's steam operations on the extension grew substantially year on year, meaning continued growth also on the connecting services from Glasgow to Fort William. This included the Caledonian Sleeper from Euston, now part of ScotRail. The replacement of Class 37s on the sleeper was long expected, but delayed for many years due to weight restrictions on the West Highland Line, plus the fact that there was no suitable modern traction fitted with electric train heating. 31 of the class had been fitted with this equipment during the mid-1980s for working passenger trains and were designated as the 37-4 subclass. A small number were retained laterally by EWS and worked by ScotRail drivers overnight between Fort William and Edinburgh Waverley. The 37's 25-year reign on the West Highland would finally come to an end in June 2006, when ScotRail opted for the Spanish-built Class 67s. This only became possible following a review of weight restrictions across many of the underbridges and viaducts on the route, with the new locomotives now passed for the line but at reduced speeds only due to their heavier axle load. The result of this was a slightly longer journey time, despite the 67's greater acceleration compared with their predecessors. Anecdotal evidence from drivers also suggested 67s were solid but no more reliable than the 37s. Yet the class would become a familiar sight along the line for many years, hired to ScotRail from EWS. With just a small amount of freight traffic left on the West Highland Line, the majority of it was eventually consumed by GB rail freight, the most notable being the alumina traffic to the Lochaber aluminium smelter. This has been the only regular freight traffic in the West Highlands for some years now, running 2 to 3 times in each direction per week. Oil was one commodity which made a return for several years, but the traffic ceased again in 2017, serving only the Fort William terminal. The sites at Mallaig, Oban and Connell Ferry have been disused since the 1990s. The Mallaig and Oban routes lost their remaining freight traffic in the early 2000s, although civil engineers workings run occasionally, alongside other rarities such as MOD trains run to Glen Douglas, near Gairloch Head. The alumina trains run loaded northbound and empty back south, after being discharged at the Fort William terminal at the foot of Ben Nevis. It's here that the smelting process takes place, to extract aluminium from the powdered raw material which is transported up in the tankers, with the finished slabs now leaving the factory by lorry. A new contract was recently signed between GB Rail Freight and the site's present owner Alvans, which should see out the next 5 years following a period of uncertainty. The northbound loaded alumina is a heavy train and can load well over 1,000 tonnes. In this footage, shot from the path of the West Highland Way, it appears to be struggling on the 1 in 84 gradient between Ardloe and Crean-Larich. The West Highland Line has continued to grow and become more and more of a worldwide attraction as the years go by. That is despite lacking the more tourist-friendly rolling stock in offer in some of the great continental railway journeys, with Class 156 sprinters continuing to operate to Oban, Fort William and Mallaig. The passenger experience isn't just down to the trains themselves however, and the beginning of the 2010s saw Friends of the West Highland Lines spearhead a tree clearing programme in partnership with Network Rail and Loch Lomond in the Trossachs National Park. Several grants were made available to clear lineside vegetation at sites such as Glenfalloch and the edge of Loch Long, opening up stunning landscapes to passengers that had been hidden for many years. It's mainly the southern section of the line which has been treated thus far, with still a tunnel of trees in many places during the summer months, but 8 different sites have now been covered on the Ardloe to Arrochar section alone. As we move forward, climate change is one of the key challenges in Scotland's railways, with record levels of rainfall and storms, particularly on the west coast. On the 28th of June 2012, a landslip caused a derailment near Tulloch, involving a Class 66 hauling the loaded alumina train, which hit a boulder on the edge of Ltree. The locomotive crashed down an embankment and came to rest only metres away from the water's edge, with the driver having to be airlifted to hospital. This video footage was taken only 2 days before the crash, and shows the locomotive at Bridge of Orchay on the very same train. The heavy rain is an ominous sign of what was to come, and as you can see here, the engine itself was in very presentable condition, having been repainted and named in January of that year. This Class 66 was just the second one to be written off after the Ltree derailment, following a highly complex recovery operation that saw it having to be cut up on site. A special road had to be constructed due to the area's inaccessibility, and the engine itself actually sat covered in a tarpaulin for over a year, before the site was finally cleared in late 2013. Some excellent joined-up thinking between local council and transport groups brought the Oban line a tremendous boost in May 2014, when the daily services from Glasgow Queen Street were doubled to 6 per day. Fort William has yet to see a similar move, though the Oban services also boosted the frequency on the West Highlands south of Crean-Larich. In 2015, Abellio took over the ScotRail franchise from First Group, and Class 158s were touted as replacements for the 156s, but this plan was abandoned after gauging complications. The 156 units were subsequently refurbished, and one key improvement has been the deployment of single-car class 153s coupled up to the Sprinters, boosting capacity for bikes and outdoor sports equipment. 153 usage started in the Glasgow Open services in 2021, and 2 years later they were added for certain workings to Fort William and Mallaig. ScotRail itself went back into public ownership during 2022. The Caledonian Sleeper has been under a separate contract since 2015, operated by Serco plc. Class 67s were replaced by the former BR Southern Region electro-diesel Class 73s, heavily refurbished by GB Rail Freight. Their unreliability soon became apparent, however, and this has led to several combinations being tried, including double heading, and being piloted by Class 66s. The Sleeper used to stop at Westerton on the outskirts of Glasgow, but from 2014 this stop was omitted and the service has instead now taken a new route, calling it Glasgow Queen Street Low Level. The train pauses at both of Scotland's major cities, changing traction from diesel to electric at Edinburgh Waverley, and works every night excluding Saturdays. The former BR rolling stock was eventually replaced by the luxurious new Mark V carriages, and loading has also been increased, back up to 6 coaches during the summer peak. The plush interior upgrade to this famous train has long been overdue, and with the service now so well used, it seems incredible that it was close to withdrawal during the 1990s. There also remains the possibility of future expansion, including a sleeper to Oban, which hasn't run since the closure of the line via calendar in 1965. For me, railways and nature, they really go hand in hand. If you think of the makeup of the British countryside, the railways are a real landmark part of that. And the line side, of course, provides such a great habitat for plant life and wildlife. I think back to being a boy of about 3 or 4 and visiting the West Highland Line for the very first time, and just for the first time becoming aware of the natural world, of beautiful Scottish scenery, of course, of wildlife, developing eventually a love for hill walking, just getting out and about in all weathers. All these sorts of things provide such a great sense of relaxation, and they're all passions of mine, so in a sense the West Highland Line gave me my identity as a person, and of course it also led to me eventually wanting to write a book about the railway. The West Highland Line is a true survivor. It played a major role in 2 world wars, it survived beaching, and it also endured a global pandemic and lockdown more recently. When you consider the railway really is the glue that holds some of these rural remote communities together in the Highlands, the lockdown had a massive impact. It's not good news to lose a couple of trains from the timetable anywhere in the UK, but up here you're talking half of the daily services. So pretty much overnight, the West Highland routes were down to about a 50% reduction in service, and this meant only a handful of trains running north of Craigiedoran each day, and they've bounced back incredibly well. I would say passenger levels are not only reaching the peak again of what they were pre-pandemic, but maybe even higher, maybe busier than ever. The private Fort William-Mallaig steam trains, now known as the Jackaby, in particular has done incredibly well to bounce back from COVID, and it now runs from April right through to October, and for much of the season not only does it now entail weekends, but it now uses 2 different locomotives and 2 sets of coaching stock, so 2 return workings which pass en route, and it's busier than ever. The West Highland Line of today is a railway on the world stage, making it a sought-after destination for charter trains. Steam and diesel-hauled rail tours are fitted around the daily ScotRail timetable, complemented of course by the Jackaby running to Mallaig. The dedicated commitment by preservation trusts and their volunteers has kept these trains going for almost 4 decades since 1984. Fort William has been a major hub of steam activity ever since, the main base being Tomnafair Depot. The morning Jackaby has the added benefit of a connection with the sleeper, allowing passengers to travel straight through from London. The second steam-hauled train, which runs during the peak season, passes it at Glenfinnan or Arisaig. The morning train leaves Fort William at 10:15 each day, and here we see it hauled by Black 5 number 45407, passing Inverlochy, a couple of miles into its journey west. The locomotives and rolling stock used in the Jackaby typically arrive north in the spring, after spending the winter at West Coast Railway's Carnforth depot in Lancashire, before returning in the autumn. The empty coaching stock workings at either end of the year provide the added bonus of steam haulage on the line south to Glasgow, assisted where necessary by West Coast's diesel fleet. The BR Mark I coaches are authentic but have since had to be replaced, with new health and safety laws coming in which only permit carriages with automatic central door locking in all of Britain's main lines. As a result, the 2024 season would see the Jackaby have a new look, with trains now using air-conditioned Mark II stock for the first time. Evidence of this could be seen when 45407 made its way back north from Carnforth that April, captured here at milepost 3 on the line above Helensburgh. Out of the regular excursions which run on the line, the most luxurious of these is the Royal Scotsman, which has included the West Highland and Oban lines in its itinerary for almost 40 years. The vintage rolling stock includes sleeping cars plus a veranda coach at one end. The Royal Scotsman runs top and tailed on its way north to Fort William, but with a single locomotive on the southbound journey, allowing passengers top-class views from the veranda at the rear of the train. Some of the British Isles' biggest scenic landmarks can be seen along the line. The highest mountain in the country at Ben Nevis, the highest station at Carrower, and Loch Lomond, the biggest inland waterway. It's these sort of attractions which are championed by Friends of the West Highland Lines, which is the railway's main support group. Their website is an excellent resource, providing not only key information for travellers but news, photographs and history of the route. The Society continues to lobby for tourist-friendly trains and line improvements, with one of their key aims being to get more services running to Fort William, filling the long afternoon gaps with no trains. Train capacity continues to be a big issue too, but summer 2024 saw Network Rail extend platforms at most of the stations to cater for 7-coach trains for the very first time in the modern era. The West Highland Community Rail Partnership is also very active in promoting usage of the line. I hope you've enjoyed this historic journey along the West Highland Railway. I'd encourage everyone to go out and see it for yourself, but before you do, check out the aforementioned westhighlandline.org.uk, as it's a great resource for visitors. ScotRail's website provides up-to-date travel information, and with a direct train from London and a plethora of private excursion trips now on offer, there are numerous options to go far off the beaten track and even further for onward trips by sea, out to the Hebrides. It's one small corner of the railway map. It's also the greatest train journey in the world. And it's the Iron Road to the Isles.